Thanks for inviting me here. I think it's my third time in Estonia, and it's been great. Was great all times so far. I'm also looking forward to perhaps coming here much more in the future too. Yeah, is it this one? Oh, there we go. There we go. Oops. Thank you. Jolly good. Thank you. Yes, I was in Portugal just before I came here. There was a conference there called News Exchange. And so there were all the big media companies. It was Reuters and CNN and Al Jazeera and so on. And it was interesting to see that all these guys are now in a huge identity crisis. They're a bit desperate about how they're going to earn money, but they also don't really know who they are. And we see sort of how journalism is shrinking away in various places. We see how many companies are now starting their own media instead. One talks about owned media instead of earned media. You don't need to earn the attention, you buy some bloggers instead. And I will be arguing that this is a dangerous development. And it's going to be a bit of a lengthy argument here. I'm going to introduce some new concepts. I've these past months been thinking up some new ideas, which will be sort of actually presented here perhaps for the first time. And I hope you will appreciate it and have some patience with me then, because it is the first time. I hope it will go well anyway. Okay, so one word there is horizontalism, and those who've worked with me know that I talk a lot about horizontal and vertical. So what I say is power is vertical. This is like the production lines in an industry, or the ministries and the government and so on. But however, I say potential is horizontal nowadays. So remember that. Power is vertical, potential is horizontal. And after this talk, you'll hopefully all know what I mean by that. All right. Let's talk about innovation. So innovation is more than invention. You probably know this by now. When we started the innovation journalism program at Stanford, there were almost no journalists who knew the difference between invention and innovation. Invention is something you can do yourself, down in your cellar, you can do a new thing that didn't exist before. It's an invention. But it becomes an innovation when you introduce it in society. So here is a friend of mine and an advisor to the center. He's called Kurt Carlson and is president of SRI International. That's where I have my offices now, by the way. He says innovation is the process of creating and delivering new value. Okay? I think that is a good definition. And it is today the major driver of economic growth. Now, I've been working for a number of years, as many of you know, with innovation journalism. We had the program at Stanford for 7 years and so on. And I define innovation journalism as journalism covering innovation, telling the story of innovation. And of course, you can't believe how many times it's been a mix-up with innovative journalism. People ask me, okay, so how should journalists use Facebook and so on? And then I say, no, it's innovation journalism. It's telling the story of innovation, just like business journalism is telling the story about business. And the business of journalism is something different. So it covers innovation processes and innovation ecosystems. So it tells the story about how innovation happens. And actually, before we started, when I Googled innovation journalism in 2002, 2003, the expression didn't exist. It had not been used. It was unused word combination. You had sports journalism, science journalism, everything, You didn't have innovation journalism. of course, people have always written and told the story about innovation before, but it was not a community. And of course, that's not so strange if nobody really knew what the word meant. Now, here comes the first time I bring in the word horizontal. And this is that if you think about introducing a new thing, right, an iPhone or something like that, well, it's no longer only technology. It's a mixture of technology and business, and politics too. I mean, things like copyright issues, privacy and so on. We get into the politics sphere now, right? Culture. And actually, we've come to the stage, and I'll come back to that later, where you might think about when the next iPhone version comes. I think it's going to come in well, it's already out in the shops, yes. But each time there comes a new iPhone version, it probably means a greater change to people's lives. The most decisions in Parliament in the time between that iPhone model and the previous iPhone model. It probably changes your daily life more. It wasn't always that way. This is something new nowadays. I'll come back to that. But if you can tell the horizontal story, where you can mix together the tech and the business and the politics and so on, then you actually can see the bigger picture of things. You can't really discuss how the new iPhone is going to change our lives or what can it do for society if you don't mix these issues. And unfortunately, of course, you know, in many newsrooms today, we are used to telling more of the vertical stories. We come from a tradition where tech journalists cover technology, business journalists cover business, and politics journalists cover politics, and they don't mix very much. It started to mix much more. But people don't really have this concept of horizontal in their heads and why it is so important. It is extremely important to mix these stories. All right. So if the storytellers, the journalists, start talking about innovation more and telling the story, then of course it becomes a platform for public discussion. We can discuss how the iPhone is going to change the labor market, for example. It's an important issue because, you know, we all want to have jobs. Maybe there are better ways of matching people with jobs. Maybe there are privacy issues. Maybe there are, you know, what's the next generation technology going to enable? Because if we make a decision of having a certain type of labor market change today using this technology, well, hey, you know, in 18 months it's going to be something new. So we all have to keep up to date with the trends. So here we have the shift from the traditional economy to the innovation economy. It used to be that economic growth was with doing more of the same, right? You built more cars, you built more houses, you grew more wheat, more of the same. We had, I'll come to that later. Now the power is more in the introduction of something new, okay? We introduce something new and then we create value that way. So the power has always been, as we've seen, in the democratic system, which is the system of regulation. We have laws about how to build cars, houses, and so on, and how schools should look like, or whatever. And then we have people who fight for our vote. And they decide what the future is going to look like through turning the knobs, basically, on and off, regulating the system. And these different political parties, they have alliances, compromises, conflicts, fight for attention. They fight for the story. Now, actually, nowadays, since our lives change more with the new iPhone than it does with these guys' decision, power is in a way being moved over from the democratic system to the innovation system. because it's the introduction of something new that makes the difference now, more than the regulation of what exists, so we can do more or less of the same. But actually the innovation system is pretty similar to the democratic system. Competition between ideas, alliances, compromises, conflicts, fight for attention, and so on. Nokia sided up with Microsoft now, for example, an alliance. Earlier they were not friends. Nokia had a different operating system. This makes a big difference for our lives. And here we vote with our wallets, in a way. We vote for the future with our wallets, and people get the mandate and they build the future. But it's still not really the same. And actually these systems hang together because these guys need regulation too, with stuff like taxes, funding for research, all this kind of stuff. So we need to, if we want to have a competitive democracy, we actually have to integrate these, right? We have to integrate these so that these guys and these guys have a constructive interaction. How do we do that? Well, again, we need to then have the horizontal language, a kind of a discussion platform, so that the politicians can compete for the vote by discussing these things. But then, of course, they need to get the attention. They need to be able to create the story so they get the vote. Otherwise, it's no business for them. So I say that journalism in the innovation economy is still key. We still need journalists for connecting the innovation economy and democratic society. And also journalists, in a way, we think of them of people who are connected to the medium, but actually journalism is about a relation between people. They work for an audience. I'll come back to that. So the important thing is that we have storytellers working for the audience, for the voters, to tell the stories. Still needed today. Now, here's something interesting. I've made a plot here. I took the INSEAD innovation ranking. So don't worry about the numbers here. That's garbage. But up at the top are the ones who are best at innovation, right? And then I took the Economist Democracy Index here. So here is democracy, here is autocracy, right? And here are the best innovators, and here are the worst innovators. That's an interesting plot. This is done about 1 year ago. So you can see here that still the democracy and innovation scale pretty well. Would seem natural, because if you have a system with free competition between ideas, that should be good at innovation, right? And then it kind of gets worse here as democracy gets less. And here you have the kind of hybrid states, the failed democracies, or the kind of mixture between dictatorship and democracy. And there are 3 deviants here. It's Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Singapore. They get up there, but otherwise it's... And then here suddenly you get into the real dictatorships, and I guess that North Korea is somewhere here, right? And up there you have more like United Arab Emirates and so on. This is something to keep an eye on, because when I was a kid, and you too, communists and capitalists didn't like each other. Do you remember that? And now we have all the capitalists complaining about the governments in their own countries. Why can't they do things properly? Why can't they move things like the government in China? They can move things, right? And the capitalists want that. I'm very concerned about that. And I think that the fault is with the competitiveness of democracy. That democracy somehow is locked in its verticals. And you need a top guy to break it in a way. And I'm saying, if we can introduce a horizontal discussion, maybe we can punch a hole in the wall of those silos. And if we can do that in a democracy, I believe that democracy can be more competitive than dictatorship. Because then you also have the freedom of ideas, everything, you have checks and balances. You know, it's not that as soon as you get a horrible leader, the country is gone. But again, everything builds on the horizontal story. And I'm coming back to that again. I'm a physicist who's become very language-centric. Just to prove to you that we actually are in an innovation economy, where economic growth is going from doing more of the same to introduction of new things. Product life cycles, okay? How long time does it take before the growth of a product peaks on the market, once it's sort of gone over the threshold and come in? This is something done by McKinsey, which was presented at the World Economic Forum in Dalian, where I was 2009. So, we're not talking computers or televisions or anything here. We're talking about beverage, tobacco, food, and converted paper product. Right? Pretty traditional stuff. So, around 70. You get into the market with your soft drink or whatever. You have about 10 years. Then it's time to think of what to do next. Yeah? Well, in that kind of economy, of course, the most important thing is to take care of the product that you have and sell it. And then you put some guys, if you have enough money, you put some guys with big brains in a house on the top of the hill and leave them for themselves. They should not disturb the guys who are selling the soft drink. And when it's time and they found something new, some new nice recipe, you can say, okay, we're somewhere here, maybe time to do something new. But you don't really need to think about it here very much. Go to around 2000. Peaks after a year and a half. Now, of course, you know, there's always statistics is never really clear. I mean, the introduction of new things is so much more today. And this is an average. But still, it is true that today, when we introduce something, we know that the product lifetime is very short. Let's say it's 1.5 years it's here. Well, you know, it takes time to develop a new product, right? Maybe it takes 1.5 years to make the next product. Well, that means that at this time, when you launch this product, you must already know what the next product is. Because you know that in 1.5 years, you're going to need to launch the next product. At this point, when the development time of the new product is equal or longer than the lifetime, well, it can't be longer, but equal to the lifetime of the product you launch, then you have really entered the innovation economy. Because then your next product is your core product. Every introduction of a product is a preparation for the next introduction. And you will know it's true if you think of the iPhone. They always, you know, when they launch the iPhone, you will know that Apple knows what's more or less what's going to be in the next coming version. Where do they want to get with that? So it's always the next product that's the important thing. If you can't do the next product, your lifetime is short. This means, of course, also that you have to take the guys that are on top of the hill and bring them down into the center of business. And it also means that they have to stop being propeller heads, and they have to actually talk to the marketing guys while they are developing. You can no longer have these extreme intellectuals that's doing things, and then you take some technology from them and then you put it on the table of the marketers and say, what can you do here? They actually have to work together. Again, a language problem. If you talk to people in industry today that are working with developing things, they will often tell you that the difficulty is to get the team to talk the same language. That's the bottleneck. All right. Now, I met Will Swope there too. He told me, this was 2009, 90% of Intel's revenues come from products released less than a year ago. How about that? The next product is the core product. The ability to do the next product is the competitiveness of the company. Let's take it to nations. The ability to have an industry in a nation that have the ability to do the next product is the competitiveness of the nation. Reasonably. You want to have that. So you want to have politicians that can provide an environment and interact with guys like this. The innovation economy is an attention economy. Okay? Innovation is the introduction of something new. Innovation is an ecological process. There's the competition. Ideas and people need to survive selection. Lots of decisions. Nothing goes by itself. It's not just turning a knob and there come out more cars. You have to make new active choices, lots of places. Are we gonna invest in this new technology or that new technology? Am I gonna buy something I never bought before? So attention is becoming a scarce commodity because now everybody is trying to compete for our attention, that we should go for their new ideas. We should buy their new products. In a way, we've moved from the knowledge economy to the attention economy. It's the attention that's the scarce commodity. It's not difficult to find knowledge anymore. It's, you go online, it's all there. The information is not scarce. So here is the concept I've been pushing for a while, and that's attention work. I say that there are classes of storytellers who actually are not knowledge workers. They are attention workers. Attention workers are those who generate and broker attention professionally. These will be journalism, PR, lobbying, marketing. I've made myself controversial by putting these two next to each other. Right? But it's okay, because they have the mandate from different directions. Okay? So scientists are knowledge workers. They generate and broker knowledge. They need attention in order to do that. Journalists and PR, they are attention workers. They generate and broker attention, but they need knowledge often as content to do that. And this also explains many misunderstandings between scientists and journalists, because journalists think that scientists are propeller heads because, they're telling stories that nobody's going to listen to. What's the use? And scientists say that journalists, they don't take our stuff seriously, they don't care about the truth, stuff like that. But I think that if these realize that there are different stakeholder groups around the storytelling, then they can communicate better. Also, journalism and PR, they are different because they both compete for a story. Journalism has a mandate from the audience, and PR has a mandate from the sources. So I'm trying to make I'm killing off objective journalism here. I'm turning the story into a stakeholder game, right? For an innovation economy to be competitive, you need to have people with different competences to communicate with each other. This is something that very often is forgotten in all innovation theory. People just assume that communication happens. But you need to have a good, what I call innovation communication system. If you think of society or an innovation ecosystem as an organism that should be competitive, it needs to have a good way of focusing its collective attention on the issues that are important. We want our collective organism to distribute the attention in such a way that we become competitive. There is an expression called the attention economy. It's usually applied to microeconomy. One talks about it in the ads and so on. I would like to introduce attention economy as a macroeconomical concept, meaning how can a nation distribute its collected attention in a way that maximizes the competitiveness of the nation. Let's go on from there. So we come back to language, because I'm talking to you in language. I'm trying to introduce some new words and stories here, and I'm trying to tell it to you in a way so that you will understand it. And hopefully you will. Now, innovation requires language. Innovation is the introduction of something new. Introduction requires communication, right? If I wouldn't be here talking, you wouldn't know what I was thinking about. I have to communicate. Communication requires language. Well, fortunately, all of us in here know English. But we also have certain stories and concepts that we communicate with. And I'm trying to explain mine to yours now. Something new needs a name and narratives in order to be discussed. You know, it's like when the iPhone first came. The new word was iPhone. It had a narrative. What is an iPhone? Well, it's a mixture of an iPod and a smartphone. So you got a story there. How can you relate to it, right? So here is a problem with innovation, because how do you introduce new things when there isn't a language? Well, you can do it in meetings like this, and then the new stuff will diffuse. It'll take some time, but it will spread, you know. Or you can speed up the communication channels. You can have, like we've had for a long while, then broadcast journalism. Then we see that the new stories can spread faster. And I will show to you that if we look back, this is exactly what has happened over the last 3 decades. Okay. How many of you were around in the 80s? Most of you, yes. How many of you read newspapers and magazines in the 80s? Okay, good. So in the 80s, I mean, there were magazines about photography and stereo and stuff. They usually came once a month. They weren't really considered journalism. If you went to newspapers, you know, they would never cover a product launch. It was not considered journalism. When I introduced the Innovation Journalism Initiative in 2004, I met a guy who was editor at Swedish National Radio for Ekonominyheterna. And he said, you know, David, that's a cool idea, but you know, we business journalists, we don't cover products. we don't want to be in the pockets of the industries. So as a policy, we don't cover products. Think if anybody said that today. So if you go today, then, Apple introduces their next iPhone. It's on the first page of the New York Times. It's on the first page of the Wall Street Journal. It's on the first page of every sort of most serious newspaper in every country around the world. What does that tell us? It tells us that the introduction of new products has become much more important than it used to be. Much more important. If we go back to the 80s, look at the innovations then. I was a student and my pals started to get telephones that had buttons instead of dials. You remember that, right? Buttons instead of dials. I was envious maybe for 3 years. I wanted a telephone with buttons instead of dials. And then I got one and I was happy. But did it change my life? No, it did not change my life. It did not change my behavior, anything. I could really not do very much more with those buttons than I had done with the dial. But today, if you have the next generation of the iPhone, or not saying so much the iPhone, Nokia, next generation of Nokia, you get new functionalities which totally changes your lifestyle. Like the introduction of maps and GPS, which now actually is usable. It's changed our lives. And this happens every so often. So it's becoming very important news. And it's very good that the news covers this, because what it does for the competitiveness is actually, we have guys who say, here comes a new thing. It has a new name, a new story. We got to tell this to people so they can discuss it. And that's what they do. So product journalism is perhaps one of the most important journalisms today. So here comes a suggestion then. Since every innovation is a language innovation, every innovation is the introduction of new language, I'm suggesting we cannot innovate faster than we can create new shared language. I don't even need to do statistics of that. It's just pure logics. Because we can't introduce anything if we don't have the name and story for it. How are we going to do it? Gustav, do you want to buy this thing that I have here? I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's thing. You want to have it? It's a glass. It's an empty glass. And then you say, that's not a new thing. That's not an innovation. And then we can discuss it. I'm going to have the language. So this is key. This was always true. This was always true. But I'm suggesting that this is now actually becoming the bottleneck, because we can develop technology so fast nowadays, especially in software. I'm suggesting that innovation has gone from being technology-centric, as it was in the 80s. It was all about technology. It takes time to develop technology. We had technology policy in countries. How do we develop technology faster? We didn't really think about the business part. In the 90s, it became business-centric, right? Because we thought, okay, we're very good at developing technology. We're developing all these things that we can't sell. We're spending a lot of money on developing a lot of swell technology we can't sell. And then our companies go bankrupt. So we've got to learn how to sell it. So then we've got a more like business-centric innovation paradigm. I'm suggesting that the next paradigm is going to be narrative-centric. We're going to be saying, listen, we can develop technology so fast. We can think of business models and payment models and everything like that. And we can do that pretty fast too with the internet. If only people found out what we were doing, why it is so good, why it is so important for them. So in business terms, that shifts the focus toward marketing. And I guess, I mean, how many of you in here are journalists, by the way? 2. Okay, right. So how many of you are with industry? Nobody is within the... Is everybody here with government or university? Everybody is with university. How many is with university? Oh, good, good. How many are with government? There are a few. Okay, so it's mainly academics. I should have done this in the beginning. You know, always know the target group. Always know the target group. Okay, so I think you'll find that many people say we have everything. Just we got people to know what we are doing. So for the last few years, I kind of turned around. I said, okay, so what if, I mean, innovation is technology, it is business, and it is a new story. What happens if we put the story in the middle? And, you know, in my head, that works pretty well. It gives a rather attractive kind of thinking. It means suddenly comparative literature is, you know, a good education for people who want to analyze innovation. I studied physics, my wife studied comparative literature. And I can tell you that she doesn't know anything about technology, but she's very quick in understanding the processes for introduction of new concepts in society. And many technologists are not. They just say, you know, here's a swell piece of technology, can do this and that and that and that. Why don't people love it? They need somebody to tell them, because people don't understand what you're talking about, stupid. That's what they do. And my wife is good at that. So, we need a language for innovation. We need a language not only for the new products, we need a language. We need an ability to introduce new language for how we do the new things. Because then we can change the ways for how we do the new things. Is venture capital a good model or is it a bad model? What do you think about incubators? What do you think about innovation journalism? What do you think about research on our ability to introduce new things? Can we discuss these things? Well, we need to have the ability to discuss it, and we need to have also simple stories, you know? So in the academic world, we don't like being simple people. That is not a good strategy. We're meant to be intelligent people and say intelligent things. And we've grown up in a culture where that means that we should say complicated things. Because if people don't understand you, it might mean that you're so intelligent that they don't understand you. Okay? It kind of works, I think, in the vertical society. You have a peer community, you develop your own language, you go deeper and deeper. I mean, I'm a quantum physicist. And much of the language is quite mystical. It's made by people who really don't think of the pedagogical aspect. They don't think of which metaphors they're using. It can be strange metaphors. And it takes a long time to learn that language. And then when you learned it, you say, hey, you know, why did that take such a long time to learn? But still, you have professional language. Now, in innovation, of course, it's about having people doing different things come together. You have to marry together business people with politicians, with technologists, and so on. And then, of course, they have to have a common language platform. Then it has to be simple. And it's a mistake to believe that it's simple to create simple language. I usually make an analogy to music. That if you hear a simple tune, it's easy to hum it. You know, you remember it. You can sing it in the shower or whatever. That's easy to do. You hear a funny joke. It's easy to repeat it. But it's difficult to be the first one who says it. I mean, why weren't they playing Beatles songs in the 1800s. They could have done it acoustically, right? They didn't have the electric guitars, but let's skip that. They could have done the songs. Why didn't they do it? So somebody has to be first with doing this kind of simple narrative that nails it, that captures people's attention, that jacks into, it offers them some kind of narrative that they relate to and they like, and it's simple. And they can just repeat it. They might not even know that it's new. This is a very special talent. Very few people have it. I was at a conference in Jerusalem, actually, a year ago. And the president of the Hebrew University, a very smart guy, he said that first comes observation, then comes generalization, then comes sort of the creation of theories and difficult language. And then he said the crown of it all is the creation of simple language. Then it can be used, only then. It's only when you can make simple language around it that it can be used. So I'm coming back to the point and hammering it in that we need these attention workers in society. We need the guys who the scientists think are twisting their stories. And we need to have a constructive relation between them and the other guys so that these people can create the stories that bring us together like this, to talk about things in simple language that is relevant and constructive. These guys need to have a shared language. You're not going to get them to read textbooks to learn language. But they need a simple language to communicate or no competitiveness in the economy. There you go. Problem. Why isn't journalism doing this already? Well, because that's the newsroom. Okay. These are the standard sections. I represent the editors by the eraser heads. It's a very, very strict vertical organization because you have to produce very fast. And these editors, they don't want to interfere with each other because that takes a lot of time. Then you have topics that go across. Well, basically they will just chop it up. And if you're a politician and you want to go out and get votes, what are you going to discuss? Are you going to discuss this story, or are you going to discuss that story? Does your team want to play football in the big football stadium, or do you want to play it in the forest between the trees? But it seems a reasonable thought that innovation, if you're losing jobs in your industry, it's a reasonable thought that innovation should create jobs. Okay, so we organized a workshop at Stanford, and we try to invite people to discuss innovation and jobs. How does innovation create jobs? So one guy was a labor guy. He was visiting scholar with me, the former Swedish Minister for Employment. The rest of the guys who came, we had 20 very qualified people. They were all techie people. And then we tried to discuss innovation for jobs, and everybody said, very, very good idea. And we need more money for industry, and we need to get up the profits, and we need to have better education, and so on. Yeah, how about the jobs? Well, yes, it gives jobs to the people who have college degrees in engineering. So those were the only jobs they could discuss. This crowd could not discuss jobs for people without college educations. You can't base an economy on that. So it's obvious that there is a very big difference in the language that is being discussed around labor policy and the language around innovation policy. Innovation policy usually belongs to the Ministry for Economy and also Ministry for Science and Education. And those have started to become closer to each other in many countries. Ministry for Employment is usually on the side of more like social politics, right? And then there's a rift. They don't talk to each other. In some countries, they've actually started to move in employment with enterprise. But it's fairly recent. So there's no real economic theory. And it's not helpful that the journalists who cover labor issues don't interact with the journalists who cover innovation issues, right? So, into the new stuff. So, okay, so if innovation is the base for economic growth today, and if innovation is the introduction of new language, of new shared language, then of course there's going to be a competition around the introduction of new shared language. So I'm suggesting that if you want to be a leader in the economy in the future, you need to answer two questions. One is, why should my story be their story? And the other is, how does it remain mine once it is theirs? So first you want to have your narrative to become the shared narrative. And then you want to maintain control over it. Because if you lose control over the narrative that you have introduced, you're probably going to be the first corpse in the ditch on the side of the road. Because everybody who comes in on the idea after you have an incentive to get rid of you. You know, anybody who's been an entrepreneur or tried to introduce a new idea knows that. Okay. Here's the new concept I'm looking at now. It's called, I call it communities, which is a mixture of communities and memes. So what I'm saying here is that words are connected by people, and people are connected by words. So when we create a new shared language, we're actually changing the community. And when we do changes in the community, we get changes in the language. This is very much related to innovation. I say community has a shared language has a community. So you have the shared language of Estonian, for example, and the community is Estonia. You have the shared language of physics, and the community is physicists. Both physicists and Estonians have also ways of protecting their memes. Not anybody can come and say, you know, I have a new physics theory and, you know, E equals MC5 instead. The community and the language is seen as one. And the benefit in that is that you see them as co-variables. How many of you have studied math or physics or something here? A few. Okay, good. So we also we lock down the community and then we say, okay, we've got these communities or these political parties. What do they say? And then you sort of lock the communities and then you measure what they say. Or you say, okay, we have this issue. Which communities say, what do the communities say about this? So you either sort of lock the language or you lock the communities, but what actually happens is that they co-develop. If you look at a political party, which is a community then, they're not the same animal today as they were 10 years ago, because the community and the language co-develop. And here I have just a practical example of how I can use it. And this is how I think also that analytics is going to change in the future. I think surveys are in principle gone. I think that many like models for economy are going to go too, because all the information is actually out there in the cloud now. All the discussions we're having are recorded. I mean, in the future, this is going to be on the web, and there's going to be some program that recognizes the language, and all the language is going to be out there. So instead of doing a survey, where we don't know anyway the quality. We just check in the big resource, the big sea of language, if we can find things there. And then we don't need to lock the questions before either. Then we can sort of, we can find answers to questions we have not asked. In the innovation economy, most of things are driven by things that haven't existed before. So the problem is actually to find the question, pretty much. Okay. Here's an example of how I've used the cloud of information to predict something. Back to the State of the Union talk, and then I'm going to stop after this so we can have discussion. The State of the Union talk, who says what about the State of the Union talk? Okay? So, what I did was, I took the word combination State of the Union, I checked on Twitter, who's tweeting about this? We've got a lot of tweets there that named State of the Union. Then we did a social network analysis. Now, social network analysis checks how people connect to people. So, if you make a tweet, and I say, you know, hello Anna, State of the Union was a great chat. And then you say, you know, Turan David says that State of the Union was a great chat. So that means that I've created one link to her because I named her, and she created a link to Turan, and then she created a link to me. And then you sum up all those links. And then you find that you get clusters of people that kind of refer more within each other than to the surrounding. So we did that. And we got 24 clusters. But we actually got 2 big ones, and the rest were very small. So here we see, from nothing, suddenly emerges the Democrats and the Republicans. These are the Democrats and Republicans. And since it's on the other side of the Atlantic and everything is the other way around, the red ones are the conservatives, right? The blue ones are the liberals. All right, so now we've taken one word combination, State of the Union. We've found that there are 2 clusters that have a stake in this expression. They are competing, in a way, for the custody over the expression State of the Union. Now, in order to turn this into communities, we also got to bunch them together with their language. Okay? So we tried first to just analyze the tweets and see if there's sort of any patterns of language, because I had this idea that basically if you can build a dictionary for each community, and if you then can have a mathematical operation so you can measure the closeness between a text and any given dictionary, then you could basically get out that, you know, this piece of text is 25% Republican and 85% Democrat and, you know, 15% liberal and so on. We couldn't do that. There's still a lot of math on that. And there I'm working with advice from Jacob Ziv, who did the LZ algorithm, if you know that, like in zipped files. And also Vint Cerf is an advisor on that one. But what I did, which was easier to do, was about 50% of the tweets contain links. So let's take these links and see where they go. So here we have a blue guy with a link, and here we have 2 red guys with links in them. And then I see if they go to some news page or some page on the web, and if it is a blue guy, I put a drop of blue on that page. If it is a red guy, it gets a red vote. So here's what we got, right? This looks pretty good. So here is the all blue Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Seems reasonable. All red Fox News also seems reasonable. If you know anything about American politics, you would say, yeah, this list looks decent. I should also say it's very low statistics here because the algorithm is done by hand pretty much. So it's like 110 data points, very low statistics. And it's also just taken in one slice of time. So using actually a very simple algorithm, rather little data, and just using the word State of the Union, by the concept of communities and the data in the cloud, I have found the Republicans and the Democrats without assuming their existence. I have found sort of a number of major discussed news outlets, web pages around the issue at hand, State of the Union, and I have put them in political order. I did not assume the existence of political parties. I did not assume the existence of these news outlets. I did not assume the existence of any ideas. The only thing I assumed the existence of was the word combination State of the Union, right? You could not do this with a survey. With a survey, you would have to do a lot more assumptions first in order you could get something like this. And probably you'd get something different because you would forget some questions, right? This, I'd say it's going to be similar with economical models and so on. If you look at economical models for growth indicators, like I showed you the INSEAD innovation indicators. So they ask stuff like how many engineers are going to be come out from Tallinn University this year? Okay. How many come out from KTH in Stockholm? And then they have lots of the other things, and then they put this together in a model, and then they rank. They do not ask things like, isn't it peculiar that painters and this type of, isn't it peculiar that painters and iPhone programmers are beginning to use the same language? They don't ask that. Many of these indicators are not horizontal. It's not about measuring the interaction. And the proliferation of shared language and the taking stakes in new language. That analysis we can do now out there on the web if we develop the mathematics and the concepts for it. We can analyze, if we want to analyze, for example, the competitiveness of different countries and industries in smartphones. We would have various models for what you need in order to build a good smartphone and all this kind of stuff, right? Traditional way. We could do it with a language-centric point of view. We could ask who has a stake in the word smartphone. We don't take State of the Union. Then we take smartphone instead. Then we see which clusters do we get. Then we see which language are they using. Which are their words that they try to claim as theirs and which they are using in order to claim custody over the concept of the smartphone.
Thank you, David. Now it's time for discussion. Students know what it means. It's influencing grade and whatever, but as I promised in the very beginning that David would like to get some inspiration, I believe that he has some smart thoughts in his mind, yet he didn't open it. Now it's your turn to try to open it. Maybe some comments?
Yes, I have some problems. My name is Carlos Tolinde. I have some problems with the idea of the marketplace of ideas. Mm-hmm. Because the best argument doesn't always win, as we've seen in history.
Right.
We've seen good arguments getting lost in and disastrous consequences. And that's something you see today as well, but because the winning argument in many parts of Europe is that you close your borders, leave the EU, leave the Euro, throw out the immigrants, and everything will be fine. Yes. So that's an argument which is winning, And the other thing is with tweets. I mean, not everyone tweets, so not every idea is there in the marketplace.
Right.
And not everyone who tweets about his real ideas.
Yeah.
They might be sort of strategic.
Yeah.
So you get the statistical problem there.
Yeah. So those were two questions. The first is, I think we agree, because it is the, I think much of the things that we see is due to the inability to discuss new solutions. So we have a tradition of discussing problems, but the media doesn't have a tradition of discussing problems and new solutions to them. And that's a problem. So one often reverts to these very traditional arguments that okay, the problems came with the new times, so let's go back to the old times, and then the problems will be gone. And another example, I mean, the European thing, typically it's also when you get like the prisoner's dilemma, like you have with the economy and the euro is the prisoner's dilemma, because, you know, they took away all the control mechanisms for the countries in the euro when there was a previous economic crisis. And then suddenly you didn't need to, all the limits were gone, and then every country could start misbehaving. And then suddenly the best deal for any country is that all other countries behave and I misbehave. And it was actually the same with the climate change conference in Copenhagen. You know, all this with discussing quotas for CO2 emissions and so on. The best deal is if all you guys are very nice and clean and green and everything, and you know, then I'll burn the fossil fuel and have nice factories and stuff because I need to feed the people. You know, we want to burn energy, and basically the only way out of that is if one finds some way for people to agree, and then it's really, you have to really be close to death, all of you, collectively, collective threat, really, or actually that you find a new solution that breaks the prisoner's dilemma. So if you could find a business model and a narrative and a technology that makes it attractive for people to get away from fossil fuel, and that's in a process of being done, then actually that's going to solve the problem. Hopefully we can do that for many of the problems in the world. The other thing you talked about is statistics, and this is a very important point, because, yeah, you know, this was only tweets. It's a selected part of the voters. There will be bias. So the more data you have, the more you can say. But you see that it is a very powerful approach to predicting things. And actually, at Google, they've seen that often the changes on stock markets and so on is correlated to the emergence of new words. And they can see it because they have the statistics. So all the companies that sit on massive statistics, all organizations that control the massive statistics are going to have power. And there's going to be a power play around the control of that data. I guess we're going into the data-driven age. I'd say that, you know, today politicians talk about privacy and stuff because, well, it's an important issue, and it's in the interest of the voters, and they can get some votes on it. But I think that before long you'll see that people who aspire to power actually will address these issues because they find that the guys who have the data have power, and that is a threat against them. And that's a completely different animal of politics. I think we're going to see much rougher politics around companies like Google, Facebook, and so on for that reason. Actually, we already saw some start with, what was it, BlackBerry in London, how suddenly they collaborated with the government and with the police and said, okay, we'll give you the information about the people doing the tweets and so on. And I hope that researchers and journalists follow up on those issues. Probably I think that we'll need some kind of, today we have bank laws around how money is handled, and they're pretty strict. So time to think about laws around the handling of the information.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. I'm Jan Haps from Good Deeds Foundation, and our organization works on the field of social innovation, so like systemic changes, social entrepreneurship, and we also experience every day how the different thinking structures and the different languages of various stakeholders, how they really cannot reach the common conclusions and common action plans. And also your story about this job innovation meeting was a real life example how a common language is very hard to find between stakeholders. But please give at least 2 real life examples that you have experienced or heard of how very different stakeholders have in fact reached common language, and even more importantly that some real actions have followed thanks to that.
No, all right. So it often happens. Let's see some example. Well, I mean, we can always do it in science and technology, right? So often when we had a meeting a few years ago, which was with the science academies of Sweden and Israel that sponsors, and so we brought together for the first time the communities of people working with issues of clean water, with people working with nanoscience. And often, if you go to science, you can trace back to some such meeting that there's some crazy guys who brought together 2 stakeholder groups, and then they have a great time together, and then they start forming a shared language. And it's often very complicated also because sometimes these guys have different words for the same thing. And sometimes it's even more complicated because they have the same word for different things. And I was actually at the, just a month ago, I was at the Marconi event in San Diego together with Jacob Ziv, who, he's pretty old now and he's seen a lot, and he was gone through basically the whole IT history. And so he told about these cases. This was around the semiconductor industry, and some scientists that got together and developed a new direction. And he said what was important was, at that meeting, was really that they felt a togetherness. So I think that it's important that people like each other, and that they, so that they want to communicate, and that they find a common interest. Now, I think that if one goes up on the macro level, what can I think, for example, there? Well, media has brought people, I mean, I need to think more about it, but I think it does, pretty clearly does happen that now and then you get stories that kind of fuse together communities. We could probably, the discussion, if we look at the discussion around file sharing, did you have that here too? Downloading music, yeah. That started with Napster and all that. That seemed to me as one event where something that had been considered pure technology now entered the public mind because people are interested in music. And that story brought together pretty much computer knowledge with the knowledge of music industry and cultural interest, and also politics, because the parliaments were discussing if, I think in Sweden, even it's said that the US embassy put pressure on Swedish government to punish people who kind of facilitated illegal downloading of music. And I think around those stories we get sort of emergence of actually a new music industry and so on. I just wish that we could have a kind of a journalism that was sort of, that had a model that it would, journalism often journalism is competitive by telling horrible stories. Because the business model is that you sell attention to people who want to buy attention, because it's called ads, right? So I show a picture of Gaddafi shot in the head. Everybody looks at that page, and then of course I can sell expensive ads on it for people who sell frozen vegetables or dresses or something like that. And that kind of means that it doesn't really matter what you show, just to get the eyeballs, and then you sell eyeballs. I call it selling raw eyeballs. You need to have business models where I, as a journalist, I tell a story, I create value for somebody, and through that, I get a part of that value. We can see it on the tech side, for example. If we look in Silicon Valley, like TechCrunch, they tell stories about the innovation industry in Silicon Valley, and they earn money on organizing conferences. And the conferences create a lot of value because they create a shared agenda around innovation. And TechCrunch is actually a part of the competitiveness of Silicon Valley. And if they write incompetent stories and they make bad predictions about technology and they do too much sensation, they're doing a bit of sensation anyway, but if they do too much, people are not going to come to their conferences. They're not going to pay. So I think it's important for people like you in foundations and government and so on to support research in finding the feedback mechanisms that kind of will promote this kind of constructive horizontal storytelling. And I can also tell you why it's going to be even more important in the future, and that's that we're getting more and more connected, right? I think that now there are more cell phones than there are people. And you find cell phones everywhere now, and everybody's getting up on the net. We're getting more and more connected. Soon we're going to be the first time in the history of mankind that everybody can put their attention on the same thing at the same time. I wrote the stories after the terror attacks in Mumbai, and I made a small back of the envelope calculation and found that 200 people were killed in the terror attacks, right? They were horrible terror attacks. But probably at least 2,000 lifetimes were consumed in looking at the terror attacks. If each person in India spent 1 hour looking at the terror attacks, that would be about 2,000 lifetimes. And we could ask ourselves, are those lives well spent? These 2,000 lives. Did it stop terrorism? No. In fact, there is like an attention economy market failure between journalism and terrorism. Because it makes good news, because it gets eyeballs, and now everybody's looking at all these horrible things all the time. And so we have to ask ourselves then, as we get more connected, are we moving toward collective intelligence, or are we moving toward collective neurosis? And I fear that if we don't get sort of an economy that incentivizes the formation of shared language around solutions, and not the type that Gusse said that throw out all the foreigners and stuff like that, but that we can have an incentive that helps us solve problems through the formation of sort of simple stories that nails it, that makes it able for us to come together and talk about what to do next, and then that will be a story. If that earns less money than telling the story about how everything is horrible, and we're going to throw out these guys, we're going to be in bad shape, and it's going to get worse. I'm not very, people are inspired by the Arab Spring. I'm not very inspired. I see a lot of negative stories coming out there. And the story is that it's good because they're destroying things that are bad. We don't have very many stories about it's good because they are building things that are good. It's good because, basically, it's good because they are destroying. And as long as they're destroying bad things, it's good. But when they start destroying good things, because, if you build something on destruction, you go on with destruction, well, then it's going to be bad. And, it's not about what we're against, it's about what we're for. That matters when we create things. I'm very worried about sort of the collective story that's been, and the mechanisms about that now. It was a huge opportunity, and that opportunity might actually be just heading south now, in the wrong way. We might be ending up with strict religious fundamentalism instead of liberalism, with free thought, which was how it started. And I think a large part of the blame for that will be how we collectively shape the stories around it.
It means communication makes sense in the world, but my question here is that how about responsibility of communication? It means that from your point of view that this responsibility question is a key question today.
Yeah, I think that it's good to have ethics. I think it's good to have ethics, because when I take a hit in life, I can anyway get out of it without hating myself too much, right? But for it to really work in society, there needs to be structures that keeps us to something. So I'll tell you, I'm not a religious man. I don't believe in God. But religion has always had the function in society of creating a shared language, a common norm. And there have been certain elements in religion then that has sort of preserved the religion. And, we see in the world today that most societies have religion. So if you're a Darwinist like I am, you have to conclude that religion has some kind of competitive advantage, though. Perhaps it's science that's the divine miracle. So we need to have this. We need to have some kind of structures that keep things in place. And with religion, it's kind of a common belief system that enables us to sort of gratify or penalize each other. And it's not only top down. People do it to each other. Between each other, we have something shared. The other is the economy, where if I tell this story, then you'll invite me back here again. I get another very nice night at this hotel. I get to have dinner with great people. I tell that story, I walk home alone. Okay? And so, and this is, of course, we all know this on the personal level. It's also, since this is work, this is also economy for us. And this is also the way it works in the formation of the public narrative. So again, I stress, for everybody in here who sort of earns their living on improving the Estonian system, you should think of a feedback system that creates value by creating simple horizontal stories that stories are a medium for people to interact through. The phone is a tool. It's also a medium. But we interact through stories. Stories are medium that we interact through. And we need to have good stories because that enables us to have good interaction, just like a good phone enables us to have good interaction. And I put a lot of effort on that. And I'd also put the effort on trying to get it bottom up, because that will be the competitive democracy part. And that's maybe what is... I just have the knee-jerk feeling that democracy is kind of not as hot anymore. Not as well considered as it used to be. And that people are kind of asking for some kind of strong, enlightened leaders like the technocrats who run China to come in and move things around and give us somebody we can believe in who doesn't mess things up, because democracy messes everything up. And what we talked about today, I think, is a system failure of democracy today. What do we do with our collective attention? And how do we shape the stories around it that enable us to create value?
But in that sense also this conflict of democracy is coming to this arena that we have in public sphere, we have different interests and different stories and conflicts between different stories.
Right.
And how you suggest or what do you think, how it's possible to find a compromise? In Estonia we have quite many stories in the newspapers which are always conflicting with each other. Very good narratives, very different interests, and they are fighting in public sphere.
Yes, exactly, because it's also, it gives more, it's better business to give attention to the fight than to the compromise, actually. So, a good compromise will get attention only if there was a good fight before it. I think that...
But how about truth?
Truth? Well, that's an interesting concept. There is, of course, truth. It took me 5 years after leaving my active profession as a physicist to realize that what's true or not true is usually much less relevant for shaping the future than what people believe is true or not true. So there's a lot of social construction of reality. But I'd say that I would use the communities type analytics. If I was Prime Minister's office in Estonia, I would take this type of analytics to try to map the languages and the stakeholder groups, or the clusters and their languages, the communities, and by language analysis kind of see around which words you have the stakes, who has where. It enables you to read this situation. Then, again, the business model for journalism. I can give you one example. I have a good friend, he's called Ulrik Hågerup. And he is now the head of DR News, the Danish news, right? So, he did a very daring thing a number of years ago when he was editor-in-chief of Jyske at Jylland. So he took, there'd been this political fight in that city was for forever, right? So he said, he went to the politicians and said, okay, so I'm the editor-in-chief of the local news here, and I'm suggesting that we're going to have a meeting in my house, and you're all going to get cameras, we're going to put full attention on you. But I have two rules for you to join this. The first is you have to bring along a new idea, and the second is you have to stay for 24 hours. And he said that, well, after about maybe 3 hours, they were all tired of fighting. They'd done their fight that they always had. They were tired of it. They couldn't talk anymore about it. So then they had to start talking about new things. And when they left the house next day, they'd reached an agreement. And that is, in a way, he got good news out of it. It was a story for him. And of course he broke the principles of journalism because he kind of engaged in the story and became an actor in it. But he didn't care. He thought he did something good. He represented his audience, and he didn't represent any specific opinion in that crisis. He just said, here's try to solve it. So he thinks that's okay. I think that's okay too. That's a concept that he now is pushing that he calls constructive journalism. He's an interesting guy. And I think that with the stories, they're so close to us, so it's difficult to see beyond. We say, like you say, but politics, how can we tell the story about, other than the stories about fights, because the politicians are fighting all the time. And then I say, well, perhaps they are fighting all the time because the story is all the time about fighting. The people and the language shape each other. So, and it's a feedback there. So it's like, it's basically a bit like psychoanalysis on the collective, or psychotherapy, not analysis, on the collective organism. How do we break these loops?
My question was especially because of Estonian context, because this authoritarian society we are coming from, it's quite intolerant toward different opinions, and in that sense, this so-called truth question is quite key question in Estonia in public debates, and it's a lack of tolerance.
Yes.
Is a real problem in my opinion, but in that sense maybe the solution somehow for also for communication innovation is that we need to educate people more, to educate and in that sense also to influence this cultural arena we are acting. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to educate the communicators, if this is what you mean. Yes, absolutely. I mean, what I've been talking around here, and some of the people here today have had the goodness to work with me. I mean, Gusse was there, and Ture was there, and I don't know if... Anyway, you were with me, and we worked on this. I mean, this is still, today, pretty new stuff. This is not taught in journalism and communication educations. Most journalism and educations today is still, the traditional trade. They don't discuss very much their role in society. And then there's a bit of, okay, how do we use Facebook, and how can we use Twitter, and how can we use the new media and so on. They do not really discuss very much who are we, and what's the role of what we do in society. And pretty often the other, the business people and the business researcher, economists and so on, they don't like touching journalism very much. It's not a very classy word. And, economists think it's too social. They want something more mathematical. Attention maybe works for them. Many of the other guys, it's journalists don't even want to be intellectual often. It would be an image problem. So I think it's time to kind of put a new emphasis on this, do new educations, and try to, if we can support journalism from being vertical and sort of looking backwards and kind of more or less manifesting us, keeping us to more of the same, and turn it to be horizontal and become an sort of an infrastructure for the formation of new shared constructive language, then I think a lot is going to be won. I think we're going to see differences in politics too, because if it suddenly gives more votes to because you manage to discuss how you're going to create more classy jobs around here, than it is to tell that politician just did something bad and he or she is an idiot. Then of course people will do that gives the best attention and gives the most votes in a democracy.
do we have some comments more?
One comment, you told that if the power is vertical, for example, different ministries
Yes.
which are not communicating with each other.
Right.
So could it be one solution that there wouldn't be any more Ministry of Education and Ministry of Economics, but something else?
Yes.
I mean, around the topics or the focus areas.
Yes. Organization is a huge thing. So there are ways of organizing organizations to be innovative. And my friend Kurt Carlson has developed one method which he applies at SRI International. And some other friends of mine also work with organizations. They did the reorganization of BBC from a broadcasting company to a content producing company and stuff like that. And it's various methods that probably could be applied in government, but government is very difficult to change, especially if you have coalition governments and so, because everything is very, very strict. It's protected by laws and stuff. I think that what often happens if you just take away a ministry, or if you introduce a horizontal function and so on, it's not always that it works, because somehow the verticals still remain. I give one example where it didn't work in companies. 10 years ago it was very popular to have corporate venture capital and corporate incubators and stuff. And then, of course, in Ericsson, for example, they had Ericsson Business Innovation. And they did the right thing. They put it right under the CEO. And anything that wasn't core business, but that was worth developing, went into the incubator. And that was in a way horizontal, because it could go across all the technique areas and so on. What happened was, of course, that the directors of the big divisions, equivalent to ministers of big ministries, they were not interested. And they wanted the CEO's attention. And then, even if the incubator formally reports directly to the CEO, once the division directors stop pushing hard enough, it sinks down, if it's not a special CEO. So I think that if you remove the Ministry of Education and spill it out in other ones, you don't know what the result is going to be. It could be that you get a horizontal connection. It could also be that you suddenly just don't have any education policy. Maybe that's good, I don't know.
Okay,